Actually, if you're not familiar, I've heard them called the China buttons. So this is the ear tag, and the way I got involved in this, so the USDA has passed a rule that all animals over 18 months crossing state lines would have to have an electronic identification ear tag in their ear. And when they passed that rule, I happened to be researching the ESG, which is environmental social governance, and methane collection and methane measurements and all of that stuff. And so these two kind of things were in my head at the same time. And I read Tyson Foods' their ESG report, which is really their methane or their greenhouse gas emission report. And what they have is scope 3, which is where they are supposed to report their suppliers' greenhouse gas emissions. So as I'm thinking about EIDs, I read their report, which says Tyson Foods will also refine scope 3 estimates and goals as supplier data and standardized methodologies for calculations across industry sectors become available. And so there is where I then went to the barn and sat down with my camera and held up an EID and said, you know, supplier data, standardized methodologies for calculations across industry sectors. That is what this can hold. And this report came out the year before the EID mandate rule was announced. And so that is kind of my involvement in the EID. And then as we will hear kind of down the road is how the veterinarians have been brought in. And I'm sure all you producers know about it's not just animals over 18 months crossing state lines. And so we'll just go ahead. Kenny, you want to start us off and tell us your involvement?
Sure, I'm the Animal ID Committee Chair for RCAF USA, and I also have the same position with the South Dakota Stock Growers. And we've been fighting this issue for over 20 years. It started out called the National Animal Identification System. We beat that back to this, and then Harriet Hageman, who just spoke here a little bit ago, she helped us in a prior lawsuit to stop USDA from implementing this mandate because they hadn't followed the Administrative Procedures Act. So now we're in the next steps of the lawsuit, and there's been some information brought to us through USDA that they kind of want to settle this lawsuit, but so far they haven't really given us anything that's, you know, that we could use. And with this rule in this lawsuit, we maintain that it's arbitrary and capricious because we already have a system that works. And why do we need to spend $3.50 or up to $5 for an ear tag that we can get for pennies on the dollar, really? I mean, 10, 15 cents, I assume. It's not very much, the little metal tags. I don't really know the exact cost. And so that's the argument that we're discussing. And as the other night when I was up here on the podium, I asked the group of people that was here, what do you want to do? Do you want to settle? Or do you want to go forward? And so if you want to go forward, raise your hand. And if you want to settle, what do you raise your hand? It doesn't look like there too many people want to settle, and I think we need to push this as far as we can.
All right, yeah. So goal of the lawsuit being get rid of the mandate, right? Not to have a settlement, it sounds like we've been agreed upon. Yeah, so Dr. Jim Stangle, he's gotten involved in this issue because he has taken a firm stand for your producers and for his clients. And you want to go ahead and explain that?
Yeah, I got started on this. Well, we had a meeting in Midland in June with South Dakota State Vet there at the time, and she asserted us that South Dakota state law was going to be fine, that our IDs were good. And I asked her how many free metal tags did we have, or free EID tags did we have in the state, and she said something like 380,000. And right there, I could tell it was going to be underfunded. We probably do close to $1 million in South Dakota, maybe not quite, but still way more than 380,000. So I purposely waited and ordered my tags when at the start of Bang's vaccinating season, and they were all gone. So I just started using metal tags, and I asked our clients. I had a few EID tags from before, and I asked our clients if they wanted a metal tag or an EID tag. 90% said they wanted a metal tag, so I kept using metal tags for a year. And November last year, we got a visit from USDA law. Came all the way out from Wisconsin just to see me. And basically threatened me and said, you know, you got a nice business here, Doc. I'd hate to see you lose your accreditation. I said, are you threatening me? He said, oh, no, you can do whatever you want. But if you turn in all your forms, and because I was filling out Bank's forms, I just wasn't submitting them because USDA said they didn't want them. But I wasn't submitting them. But now they want them. And if you turn them in and promise to start using EIDs, this will all go away. And so I started using EIDs against my better judgment. But that's how it kind of I got into it.
Just a couple questions to clear things up. So your meeting, they told you all animals being vaccinated for brucellosis would have to have EIDs, right? So that's
Right.
where you come up with we need way more than 380,000.
Right.
I'm guessing,
Well,
because the rule was crossing state lines, and that is to go back to the timeline. USDA stopped making the metal tags and producing the metal tags, so veterinarians couldn't get them, and that was before the rule had been approved. And the way the rule works, they introduce it. There's a comment period where producers are, give their thoughts, which were completely ignored, seemingly. And then the mandate was put into place. And to be clear, this was all under Tom Vilsack's USDA during the Biden administration. Yeah, and so I guess there we are.
Well, I think that was the basis for the 380,000 because that was an estimate of how many cattle over 18 months of age were going to be crossing state lines.
Right.
That was how they came up with the number.
Yeah.
And then when they added Bangs, they were automatically underfunded.
Right. And so to go into the timeline, they stopped producing the metal tags. They jam through the mandate. They tell veterinarians that they have, which the mandate is only crossing state lines, so that makes it, I think they said 11% of all cattle would have to have an EID tag, which also gives a much smaller price tag for what the American taxpayer has to pay to cover the price tag of all the tags. And then, but the state vets and the USDA come out and say, actually, it's all animals. If you want a USDA tag, it has to be an EID. And so that's where, and then apparently, if you wanted to do what your clients ask you to do, then you get a visit from the USDA. Go ahead, Julie, and tell us. You're the next stop on the USDA's route, I guess, right?
Yes. So I'm Julie Trask. I'm a veterinarian from Elm Springs, South Dakota, not too far from Dr. Stangle, but here in western South Dakota, 60 miles from Rapid. And I had started hearing in the summer of 2024. The rule came in November 5th of 2024. Correct?
Yes,
that was the timeline.
Right, yeah.
So I had been contacted by the USDA office in Pierre before that, telling me to get signed up to get my free tags. And the gal that I've been accredited since I graduated from vet school in 2012. I've done accreditation work for the state and for all my clients since then. And I know Anna Torfison in the office very well. I have sent her paperwork. My paperwork, has improved. She has told me over the years, and I was getting somewhat good at it. And then she said, well, you're going to have to premise register, and then I want you to do this so you can get these free tags. And it was like a courtesy call, a kindness. Get signed up fast because they're going fast. So quick. And I said, Anna, gosh, no. That's premise registration. I said, you maybe you don't understand, but we've been down this road. This is what they did in 2009. This is forced premise registration. This is top-down control. I said, no, thank you, sweetie. I'm good on the free tags. I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to premise register. And so we'll just, I guess I'll figure out what I'm doing when I do it. And she said, well, then you don't need to send your paperwork in. If you're not going to use the EID tags, we're not going to accept the paperwork. And I said, okay, so should I not even fill the papers out? Or how are we doing that? And then she said, it doesn't matter. And I said, okay, fine. That's what we'll do then. So I continued on until I ran out of the USDA issued metal tags. And by that time, I had decided that I would contact the National Band and Tag Company, which is the company that the USDA had contracted with for years to make their metal tags. I contacted them. I asked them for tags. I paid. I wish I would have known exactly how much they cost. I didn't look it up, but it is not $5. It is not, no, it's less than $1 per tag. And that's with shipping, which was the majority of the cost because they're heavy. And so I had them sent to me, and I was using them. And I had contacted the state because I had still been filling out all my paperwork, but I hadn't been sending it in. And I contacted Anna, and I said, I need more forms. And she said, no, we're not sending you forms. And I said, all right, well, then I'll run my own database. And I'm not using the EID tags, and I am still doing, the tattoo, and I am bangs vaccinating because my clients need that. This is after we got through the manufacturer crisis of we can't get the RB51 vaccine, which I think was orchestrated to cover up for the fact that they didn't have enough EIDs to supply demand. So then they just caused another little wrinkle in production to make themselves look better. We've never ever had a shortage of RB51 vaccine, and we haven't since either. But anyways, we got through all of that, and a year later, more than a year later, is when Brenda Ashbach comes to my house. And I come out of the office, and Savannah's out getting the pickup ready. We're supposed to be leaving any second. And here she is standing in the corner like a cat on a tin roof with big, huge eyes. And I'm like, hello, welcome. And she says, I'm Brenda Ashbach with the USDA, and I'm an inspector, and I'm going to need to, I'm wondering about you and your bangs vaccination. And I said, yes, Brenda, what are you wondering about me and the bangs vaccination? And so she proceeds to give me the riot act about how I was commissioned by the USDA to do this job, and I am so out of line, and why am I not using the EIDs, and et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, it is very interesting that you come a year after I told your agency that I would never premise register and I would never use the EIDs, to come out here and act like I'm hiding my paperwork and sneaking around doing something illegal, because I'm not. I said, this system works, and Brenda, I'll have you know that in South Dakota we had a proven 24-hour traceback with the brand system in tandem with the bangs vaccination protocol and the brands. We have proven that we're 24-hour traceback, and I don't see that improving with the EID. And if I guess you're out here to tell me that I'm a bad guy because I'm using metal tags that I bought myself to continue doing the bangs vaccination program, which it looks like your agency would like to see done away with, because if my clients actually were forced to use EID, they would stop participating in the bangs vaccination program rather than that. And I said, you know, Brenda, do you have people that you love and that you work for? And if they asked you to do something, would you, you know, just like ignore everything that they say because Big Brother told you to do this? Which I said, for example, COVID, you know, did you get the jab? They told you to do that. Are you doing that? Like, it's really rich of you to come out here and act like I'm a bad person because I'm doing what your agency asked me to do forever, except I'm doing it with the metal tag, which they give no reason why it doesn't work, and the authorization for making it non-official ID for the USDA was given in a memorandum to an addendum of the final rule. It was not voted on. I said, and I'd like to know who in your agency authorized that addendum, the memorandum to the addendum of the final rule, because that was not a blanket decision by an agency. That was one person. And she stopped and she said, that's interesting, because when we changed the goat and sheep one, I do remember exactly who changed it. And I said, well, you know, if we could pull back the curtains and find the name at the USDA who did this, that would be helpful. I would love to talk to that person. I have gone up the ropes as far as I can. Dr. Turner, I spoke with the state Beth Thompson for our state, and nobody wants to be the person who did this, but you all want to enforce it on all the rest of us who never wanted it and never asked for it. And so I gave her all of my paperwork. I invited her to come back because me and Savannah had to leave, and she did, and we talked about it at length. And in the end, I liked Brenda Ashbach. She was a kind woman. She was rattled because she had been to Dr. Stangle's. And she had also spoken to my sister on the phone. And actually, when we were going down the stairs to leave, she turns around, me and Savannah, we're talking and walking down the stairs, and then she pulls out this trifold Bucky Beaver badges, and she's like, and this is the authority invested in me of why I'm here. And I was like, there, Brenda, you told me your name. We're good. Thank you. So
She didn't remember the tag until the last minute, her EID, her badge.
yeah, right. It was a trifold to me. It came down like this far. And I was like, that's very nice, Brenda. I know your name. So anyways, she took my paperwork. I followed up with her and she said, you will probably be unaccredited. And I said, that's where we're going then. I said, you do what you got to do, Brenda, and I'll do what I have to do. So if that's what I deserve, then go ahead and unaccredit me. And she said, as she was leaving, and she gave me a hug, and she's like, I hope you fight this. And she actually said that because I said, I will, Brenda. I will. And thank you. You know, I'm sorry that you have to be this little person that comes out and terrorizes people when actually her little heart wasn't like that. But I said, I will, and all of my people will too, because it's wrong. And I have never seen her again, and I have never been officially unaccredited, so I believe I am still an accredited veterinarian, although I don't send any paperwork in, and they don't talk to me that much.
You did offer to send. You said you've been keeping the same paperwork you have, and you told Brenda that you would send this.
I did.
Yeah.
I had always had my own internal database that I kept track of all of my clients, the classes of cattle, the age, all of that. It's all on a form, and I still keep track of that, and the date that I gave the vaccine, and so I have it if I was asked to fill it out.
Because as a veterinarian, your goal is like animal health, right? And
Yeah.
so if you did, if someone saw one of your tags and tried to trace it back, you could easily do it, right? Just like
Easily could.
Yeah.
Easily could. Right. Yes.
Yeah, and I think Brett knows there's a report. What did it say? 50% of all states within an hour can trace back. I think USDA did a test. This was long. I mean, it was a few years ago, but yeah, I think they came back and said that 50% of all state or over 50% of all states can trace back within less than an hour as far as an animal disease of where that animal came from. So
With the old system.
yeah, that was before the mandated EID deal.
And
Yeah.
as far as from what I've heard, the new trace back exercises, which states are supposed to be participating in, they're not giving any data.
Right. I mean, it's.
It's
I mean, I showed you, and you've seen the metal tags. This thing's so small, I can't even get it out of my pocket. But yeah, I mean, that's your number, and that's the number if an animal is diseased and needs traced back, and you don't have a reader. This is the same number, and it's on plastic, and it's not engraved, right? So it can get rubbed off. So if you're a veterinarian, you don't have a reader, you have to write that whole number down to trace it back, just the exact same way you would with a metal tag.
Yeah, and interestingly, Brenda gave me a packet of information about all what my job was. And in it, it says you're supposed to put, at the time of Bang's vaccination, a tamper-proof device in their ear. And it was highlighted. And I was like, Brenda, what? I mean, come on, a tag cutter. That's very simple to tamper with. And you're highlighting it as if I don't. Let's have a race. You take a metal tag out, and I'll take a plastic tag out, and we'll see who wins.
Right. Yes. Did she ever say who sent her? Or what division she was with? Like you said, she's an investigator, or
I do know at the time the government had a mini shutdown, except not her.
oh, so this was during the shutdown.
Yes. All other agencies were shut down, but not Brenda. I said,
Yeah.
Isn't that sick, Brenda?
And I can remember they were not traveling, right? Like I
Yeah.
can remember. I think
Yeah,
the
they wouldn't-
secretary didn't travel during that time, or something happened where they weren't. Like USDA people weren't traveling, but they came to your offices.
Inspectors were.
And you had no prior knowledge of her showing up.
No,
She just knocked on your door, pretty much.
no.
Showed up in my dining room.
Yeah, she showed up. Completely. We were out Bangs vaccinating. She showed up, and my office manager text my tech, and it says, "Oh," she says, "you're in trouble now."
Is this part of the lawsuit? Is this?
I don't think it is, because I don't think you guys were ever deposed in the lawsuit, were you?
No, we weren't even told which law we broke.
Right. Was it APHIS then? Is it? Okay. So it would have been.
Yeah, it
Well,
was
USDA, but that falls under APHIS.
Yeah.
Plant and Health
Yeah.
Inspection Services.
Yeah. And I've reached out, and there's just a lot of confusion of. USDA is a gigantic organization, hundreds of thousands of employees, I think, and it's one issue after another. Like right now, they're scrambling for the last few weeks on screwworm, and but there are people in USDA that are just dead set on every animal carrying that tag, and I'm not sure where that comes from. It doesn't come from the top, I know that, but and these are the people that are just lifelong bureaucrats, and it doesn't matter, the Biden administration, Trump administration, they just feel like they can do whatever they want, it seems like.
Well, when you bring up the screwworm issue, and Jim and I talked about this yesterday, I also know I have a friend that's told me that Mexico is not putting in the blue TB tags because of the infection that can be started there, and the fly could get in there. Well, the EID tag is even more severe, and this winter, a couple of my friends had infections, pretty high rates of infections in their cattle that used the EID tags in their heifer calves when they Bangs vaccinated. One guy, he documented, he said it cost him $30 a head to clear it up. The other individual, I don't know, he said he doctored heifer calves all winter long, and I don't know how many he ran, but I'm sure he runs quite a few cattle. And so when it come time for Jim to vaccinate mine for Bangs, I had to buy the tag, but at that time they didn't force us to put the tag in the ear, so I didn't do it.
Right, and I know producers who have said they're done vaccinating for brucellosis now. to go back to the screwworm, we talked to the number 7 screwworm case in Texas. I think it was last week, and he said yes. Texas Animal Health came out and said he had to have an EID tag and everything on his property, whether it was leaving or staying or anything else. It had everything on his property because he was an infested area or zone had to have an EID tag. And he said he definitely didn't like the idea, but you know, it's such a kind of whirlwind for these people who find it on their places, and Texas Animal Health comes out and they're the vets and they say this is what you have to do, and they're in charge of animal health, and so they put a hole in a calf's ear with screwworms in the air, it seems like. But yeah, just to go back, I guess your client reaction to the EID thing, or you want to talk about that a little bit, like what your clients think, or have they?
Categorically, they all hated it, almost all of them. There's a subset that really didn't care. They, one way or the other, they really didn't care. And then some that just absolutely hated it. But if you gave them the choice, 90% chose not to use it. And those that chose to use it did it. Oh, some were afraid they'd lose a government lease. Some had experience working with the government and didn't want to fight them. Some of them actually thought it was a good deal. We're going to start using these EIDs in cattle management systems. So there were a number of reasons why those that chose to use it did, and I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, there's a giant gap there between voluntary and mandatory, right? It is a tool that can be useful for people on their ranches, and I don't want to, I've given these kind of speeches before, and people come up and they seem like they feel bad because they use them on their place. I'm like, don't feel bad. They are a tool, and if it helps you with your ranch, you use it, but you should have the ability to cut it out at any time. And that is your right for your property, as Shad would say. This is a property rights issue because that is your property, and you should be able to do what you want with it. I was going to go ahead.
Well, another thing about this issue, and some friends of mine we've discussed it, with this big push for data management centers, or whatever you want to call them. They're going to manage all of my cattle with that EID tag number. And, you know, computers can be hacked. And I've heard of an instance, and I didn't verify it, but I did hear of an instance where a man had EID tags in his livestock, and they were hacked, and somebody else claimed that they were their livestock. These things could happen. I don't know if this actually happened, but it sounded like it did. And then in the country of Scotland, I just read about a couple days ago, there was a man that owned some cattle, and he didn't have the EID tags in the cattle. The government there condemned his cattle and fined him because he didn't have ear tags. That's what I'm afraid of, and that's where this is going. It's more control, and they're going to tell us how to manage our livestock, which most people in USDA have no clue how to manage anything.
Yeah. And to go back on the animal health side, right? The goal for brucellosis vaccinations is that your animal doesn't get brucellosis, right? So are you required to put a tag? Like as a veterinarian, when you vaccinate something, you're required to put that tag in? So if they want a brucellosis shot, they have to have the tag.
So according to the paperwork, and yes, the accreditation job of a veterinarian is to give the shot, put the tattoo in the ear, and put a tamper-proof device, that a form of ID acceptable to the USDA, in the animal's ear. That was the original intent, and how the BANGS vaccination program was spelled out. So you were supposed to put some form of ID in the ear at the time.
Yeah. And the tags you were using, Jim, those were USDA tags, right? Like Jim had
That's
thought
correct.
ahead, right? You had
I
saw the
always
rule
ordered
come in.
10,000. Well, the day that we went to the meeting in Midland, I went home and ordered 20,000 tags.
And that's, how many do you usually order?
Usually 10,000
Okay.
in a year. Plus I had some little bit of carryover from the year before. And I did not get 20,000. They gave me 12,000, but I had plenty of tags on hand because I knew that they were gonna run out of.
Did they say why? They didn't
No.
have any more?
No.
Or they just said, we're only gonna send you 12?
And actually, as it turns out, because I contacted the National Band and Tag Company, and I asked them, when's the last time you made tags for South Dakota? And they said they had just shipped 300,000 to South Dakota. And I said, really? Because they told me that they didn't have any. And she said, no, we sent them.
And so that goes to the state vet?
That goes to the USDA office, and it's in tandem with the state vet's office, but they're issued by the USDA office in Pierre.
Well, the other thing was what Dr. Thompson told me when I contacted her about the metal tags. She said, well, we boxed them all up and sent them back to USDA.
I'm assuming they
What-
asked them to do that, right?
Yeah, but what was the date? Because
That wa-
National Band and Tag had just sent them, and I had been deceived.
This was just before she retired. It was like early spring, you know, maybe last winter.
It was during the stock show because you were here.
Yes, yeah, it was right there, like in February or January.
Had you
That
guys
doesn't
heard
add
of
up.
any other veterinarians in any other states being visited, or you're the two
She
rebels?
She indicated
Your comment about Dr. Crawford, you know, he said in Sundance, Wyoming, he actually called the USDA to see if he could use metal tags for someone who was adamant they didn't want, and USDA said, well, I guess they're under 18 months of age and not going out of state. I guess you could use them. Yeah. Then he was threatened by the state vet.
Yeah, I have heard. I think Harriet said in Wyoming they are pushing for a state mandate on all cattle, and these are coming from the state veterinarians. Have you spoke with your state veterinarian, like, or were you ever contacted by them? Or
no.
anyone
I
else?
had only spoke with Beth, and she is no longer the state vet.
Right.
But she was the one that I was talking to leading up to the rule memorandum of addendum to the rule, and then as far as the investigation, I've contacted USDA, well, specifically Brenda, to ask her, because she indicated at that time, that was November, middle of November of 2025, a year after I had not been doing what they wanted. Then I kept contacting her and I even told my clients, looks like you should schedule with somebody else because I'm not going to be accredited anymore and I won't be able to do it. And then I never heard. She said pretty much like in 2 weeks or 3, you'll be unaccredited. And I was like, all right. And then I called after about 4 weeks and I said, hey, are you unaccrediting me? Like, what's happening? Or
Hurry up,
else,
right?
yeah, I'll have to start working. I mean, you can't just leave people. And she said, you can call, or let me make a call or something. And then I got an email from Megan Visger, who's a different, this ever popcorning to the next person. Mm-hmm. We can't ever just have a conversation and finalize the conversation between me and one person. But Megan Visger sent me an email and said, the investigation is ongoing. And I said, well, then I guess I'm going to start working.
Yeah.
And I have ever since. And I
Right.
told them, and I am Bangs vaccinating. I am doing all the accreditation work. And if you want to pull that, you tell me and I'll stop.
Right. Yeah. And so, really, what could have? I mean, have you heard anything from them since?
They were still investigating me because I happened to slip up and mention a health certificate I wrote on some calves that were going to Montana that I used. I Bangs vaccinated them with metal tags because this client wanted metal tags, but when I get there, 70 miles away from the clinic, he said, oh, these calves are all going to Montana. And I didn't have any EIDs with me, so. And I mentioned that to Brenda, but said, I mean, what was I going to do? Go home and or just cancel? And they had all the cattle in. And she showed up at my client's house wanting to know about those cattle, and it turns out most of them were under 6 months at the time, so they weren't even qualified. So I wasn't breaking any laws.
Right. Which you never have. Well, I mean, the whole thing is like the rule was not for brucellosis vaccinations.
Right.
You know, there is no rule that you have to EID for brucellosis vaccinations. So, and it sounds like if you would have never reached out, you would have just never heard from him again. She says you're losing your accreditation and out the door, and then
gone, poof.
Right.
And I have no, I'm not sending anything in, but on the same token, I continue to do everything that I was before, but I just told him, okay, well, and she also said, I need you to write an affidavit and explain yourself. And I said, no, Brenda, not doing that. I have explained myself till I'm blue in the face. I have made these calls. I said, at this point, you do what you're going to do, and then I'll do what I'm going to do. And I said, and there will be pushback, Brenda. So just get ready.
I had to write an affidavit too, and many of you read it in the Stock Grower magazine. It turned into a manifesto.
I guess full disclosure, Shad has reached out as part of our podcast. We had heard this story a while ago, and we've reached out and heard he's called, I think, multiple times and heard nothing to Brenda's office and not gotten a response. So it seems, they've kind of quit, but I don't know. It's just a very odd story, but one that producers should all hear, because as this thing happened, like this was the warning. Like they are trying to control what you're doing, whether it be methane or just movement of cattle, or they want to know the numbers. Jim, you had said, I guess this goes into the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. They had policy to mandate all tags or tags on all cattle, EID tags. And that policy, if you remember at their convention, Corbett Wall was on every day on Feeder Flash, informing people, and a lot of these sale barn owners threw a big fit, and the policy did not get passed. But then they continued to lobby to have the tags paid for the mandate that wasn't even in effect yet, and USDA had not finalized the rule. But the organization that NCBA wants to house all the data, they wanted this organization to be in control of all the data, and they are already in control of a lot of data through Kansas State, and it's called Cattle Trace. And Jim, you had said you had kind of looked into that organization.
Well, you gave me the final piece of the puzzle when one of the owners of Cattle Trace is part owner of National Beef.
So Mark
a Brazilian
Gardner,
company is going to have access to the total number of mama cows that are out there.
yeah. So Mark Gardner last I checked, he was the chairman of the board of Cattle Trace. He is also the chairman of the board of U.S. Premium Beef. U.S. Premium Beef owns 15%, last I checked, of National Beef. At one time, they were the majority owner of National Beef. And so, yeah, that's, if you remember the testimony where Justin Tupper was in Congress and NCBA had a chance to bring in their cattle producer, they brought in Mark Gardner, who has a big ownership stake in a beef packer. But he if you've heard of Gardner Angus, he is a rancher. So this was their rancher, who also happens to be chairman of the board of a company that owns a beef packer.
So here's the deal. That explains why the USDA office wanted my records when originally they said they didn't. Why they wanted Julie's records, even though her IDs weren't even official. We represented 20,000 head that weren't in the database. 20,000 head. So it doesn't matter what form of ID. They want the database. They want the total number of head. So Kenny, we didn't put any tags in there, but they still got the total number of head you banked. This is like the National Gun Registry for cattle. The people who are buying your cows, your calves, are going to have a national database in a few years of how many mama cows are in this nation and be able to set their prices accordingly. I mean, what are the odds that one of the four big packers is going to own the data company that holds this data. And another piece of that puzzle is, I don't know if you know it, but all of our health certificates have to be digital now. We have to do a digital ID, so we're doing the state vet's job for them. Now, those digital IDs require, in some cases, like with mature cows going across state lines for breeding purposes, the EID has to be listed on the health certificate. With those EIDs and those cattle that are going across state lines, that data is being maintained by the company that does the digital service. There's VSPS, VetCentry, Global VetLink. So those aren't going into a national database, but those are the cattle that are referred to in the Animal Disease Traceability Act. Bangs vaccination isn't listed in the Animal Disease Traceability Act. These cattle are, but they're not the cattle that are going into cattle trace. They're the cattle that are being monitored in these other companies and the data's held there. So this cattle trace company looks to me like a national database to find out how many mama cows are out there.
Yeah, and to go back, National Cattlemen's Beef Association also, during the comment period of after introducing the rule, they were given, I think, $465,000 by the USDA, by Vilsack's Biden administration USDA, and that was supposedly to strengthen the traceability program of the cattle industry. And it just so happened that the NCBA president started writing op-eds and talking about how important DIDs would be after receiving $465,000 into his organization. So, just
The same money train between Kansas State and Cattle Trace and USDA, all these grants to promote traceability and disease prevention and all that. It's all just money being funneled to continue forcing electronic IDs
Right.
and demonstrate how amazing they are.
yes,
Well, this is what I did. We bangs vaccinated our heifers. Jim did. We didn't put the tags in. And when I got ready to sell the heifers that we didn't want, I sold them. And I advertised they were bangs vaccinated. Nobody said anything. So how are you going to track them? Maybe by the time they turn 18 months of age, they probably will if they cross state line. If they don't, nobody knows where they were or who they came from. If they use their ear tag, they can trace cattle without that ear tag. They do it all the time with records, sale records, brand inspection. Way
They
back.
even use the color of a dangle tag.
Oh, sure they do. Whatever
They
on
use
them.
everything they can.
Yeah.
yeah,
Years ago, when we had the BSE come in from Canada, and they were trying to use the NAIS to scare us into using that, the South Dakota Stock Growers did brand inspection in western South Dakota. Well, our chief brand inspector at the time, Jim Reed, was able to trace the herd mates from that Canadian herd that had come into Montana and into South Dakota and were slaughtered right here in Rapid City. At that time, it was Black Hills Pack. And he did it in a couple of hours, just by using brand records.
yeah. There's it's a story that goes on forever. Did we want to take questions or did not? I don't know. I hadn't been. I would say that what's going on in Nebraska is pretty interesting. How when I started looking at this, Adams Land and Cattle has their own EID software that you can buy from them, and they also have. At the time, they said they had around 250,000 head that they were backgrounding and feeding, and that every one of them got an EID as soon as it got onto the place. So if you can figure that out, you have 250,000 head, every one of them gets an EID tag. Well, even if like a really cheap one, if you're ordering 250,000 at a time, it's going to be probably at least $2. So there you have $500,000 worth of EID tags. Now in Nebraska, they have, tried to work this brand law to where feedlots don't have to abide by the same brand rules, and it kind of goes back into the EID deal. It just kind of the whole story never, it just keeps going, and it all kind of turns into what we've called incrementalism, right? If you don't take a stand like these wonderful people have done, at where they can start collecting your data, which is with these things, then it's just going to keep edging and inching to more and more control.
Well, as much as the Nebraskans are embracing it, in South Dakota, amongst my producers who buy cattle who have EIDs, there's a lot of removal because it's considered a violation of their private property rights. The EID and the information in the EID is owned by other people that they did not authorize, and that weakens the traceability of any program when you have the masses rejecting it and taking them out. So, okay, you know that there's a pile of EIDs on the ground, in corrals all across western South Dakota. Hooray.
This did start in Nebraska. During Trump's first administration, Undersecretary of Ag Greg Abbott is from Sumner, Nebraska. This is his brainchild. He even owns cattle. He thinks it's a great deal. And when it got defeated the first time, I talked to a sales rep of mine. She says, "Greg Abbott, I know him. My kid's 4-H with him." And so she confronted him. He said, "Are you done with this now?" I said, "No, we're going to go back and jigger a few things. We'll be back."
And his wife was the sponsor of changing the brand bill in the Nebraska legislature. So, did we have anything else? You want to hit on anything else?
Even to go along with what Jim just said, IBOC was pushing this whole thing even when Obama was president. He might have been the Secretary of Ag at that time in Nebraska. I don't remember what his title was for sure.
I think he was at one time.
But he's always been a pusher of it, and he's a tough nut to crack for sure.
Well, I guess to wrap things up, I would say this country was built by people standing up for freedoms, and I think we definitely owe these two a big round of applause and thank you, because if it wasn't for those people, we'd all just kind of...
Thank you.
Thank you.